听专家解读美国升学方案，看美国学习生活点滴，圆美国名校梦想。本节目由美国文美教育集团冠名播出。
大家好，欢迎来到文美集团美国升学直通车。文美集团美国升学直通车是华人网和文美教育集团联合制作播出的北美首档大型的网络直播教育节目。在我们的节目当中，你将会了解到最新最权威的教育资讯，还有升学的建议。在我们的节目过程当中，无论你是学生还是家长，有任何的美国升学教育问题，都可以给我们留言，我也会请我们的嘉宾尽量来回答您的问题。文美集团是美国著名的大学申请及规划辅导机构。20年规划经验，在美国洛杉矶、纽约、芝加哥等12个城市设有服务中心，为广大华人子女提供教育服务。文美集团专注于美国大学升学规划服务，教育学博士+常春藤名校面试官顾问团队，中美双顾问模式，为6到12年级学生提供最好、最全方位的教育服务。欢迎大家扫码或者是直接搜索关注文美集团的微信公众号美国文美，及时了解最新最全的美国升学资讯。如果想跟文美的客服互动，请在节目播出期间扫描屏幕左下角的文美客服二维码，或者直接搜索微信号文美集团的全拼音添加。文美的咨询热线是1888-789-0942。好的，下面我们就要请出我们的美籍顾问皮埃尔先生哈，跟大家来讲一讲这个我们今天的话题哈。今天我看到这个皮埃尔先生跟大家要分享的是在申请表当中啊填写的时候要注意的事项。其实这个也是万博士在之前跟我们强调过很多次的，所以我想问一下万博士啊，就是这个申请表您之前说过啊，其实要从高中开始就开始去了解它，去认知它，所以它的这个到最后的话，是不是还是有很多是我们可能会忽略或者是误解的地方？
对的，咱们中国人一句俗话叫知己知彼，百战百胜。
对，
其实这个彼指的就是这张大学申请表，是吧？之前跟大家讲过，甚至很多大学是没有面试的，他就是看这张申请表，就是看你申请表里填的所有的文字，甚至连图片他都不接受，链接更不接受，
对，
是吧？所以在这里边的每一个细节，我们如何把它做到位，变得非常重要。那么在你熟悉了，并不等于你重视每一个项目，所以今天我们就总结出来一些经常被我们在填申请表中不那么在意、容易忽略的一些项目所以这个的话呢 ，Mr. Pierre 他经常看这些学生的申请表嘛，是吧？给他立下的印象，所以他给大家讲这个其实是非常适合的。
是的，所以呢，这个大家要好好的听啊，特别是对于我们这个即将可能要递申请的同学们来说。好，下面我们来请皮埃尔先生来给大家做讲解。
Hi, this is Pierre for Wenmei. Today's topic is going to be the additional information section on the Common App and the additional comments for both the academic history and personal insight sections of the UC app. This is actually a little bit more obscure of a topic, but I feel like it could be something helpful, especially for students that are interested in applying to the most competitive colleges. So first we'll look at what I'm talking about in terms of where these things are located on the applications. And then we'll talk about how to use this space, these opportunities to talk more about yourself, as well as bring up important points about certain things that you did in terms of your activities or awards. So first I'd like to start by talking about the Common App, since most people will be applying to Common App schools. So for that, I'm going to share my screen, but let me switch to the other window. Actually, okay. So this is the actual Common App online. As you can see, I went to the writing section, and besides the personal essay, which is required for the vast majority of colleges, there's this lesser known section on the bottom. So what you'll see is this for the essay. You see this for the essay, it'll tell you like which colleges require the essay. I'll ask you to choose a prompt. And below that, you have the additional information section. So if you read this, community disruptions such as COVID-19 and natural disasters can have deep and long-lasting impacts. If you needed, the space is yours to describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study spaces. For more information, check out our COVID-19 FAQ. So the first question they're going to ask you is, do you wish to share anything on this topic? So you can also write about, if you were affected by COVID-19 or other things such as like natural disasters, right? You'll have the space to do that. However, my focus is not so much on that for today's video. It's more so on the second question, which is, do you wish to provide details of circumstances or qualifications not reflected in the application? So this is where you're going to answer yes, and this is the first part of what we're going to be talking about today. So first thing you want to know is that you have a maximum of 650 words, right? Pointing that out because for some spaces you have character limits instead of word limits, but in this case you have 650 words. So it's a decent amount of space, And what you want to do in this case is you want to use this space to talk about mostly your spike. In other words, if you think about the last video, we talked about your spike being your strongest activity, like the one that you accomplish the most in, the one that stands out and makes you, let's say, unique, amongst everybody else. So it's going to be like your best activity. And sometimes it's possible to have maybe like one or two activities that stand out where you're like, let's say like at least national level in terms of achievement or impact. But in this case, we're talking about what would happen if you are going to describe your best activity, like your spike, which is what we talked about in the last video. So we're going to go into detail, but I just want to show you where it is on the actual Common App. So this, if you're working off the Common Core item form, I would include this as a separate section in itself so that you remember to complete it. You can add it on later to your core item form, but it is something that I think is really important. So we'll talk about why in a bit. So this is going to be for the Common App. Next, I want to talk about where to locate the equivalent on the UC app, since a lot of students will be applying to UC schools as well. So this is going to be in the academic history section. And what they're going to ask you is, if there's anything else you want us to know about your academic history, you can do so in the space below. But remember, you should use this space only if you want to describe anything that you have not had the opportunity to include anywhere else in this section. For example, break in attendance, poor grades in a particular course or year, specific information about your school environment, or policies that affect your academic record or choices for classes. And there's also a note here for international applicants. International applicants, if you selected other as your school's grading system, please explain the grading system here. So this is where this would be the equivalent for the UC app. And what we're doing here is essentially the same thing we're going to be doing for the Common App version. And so again, we're going to be talking about our spike, or at the very least, perhaps your top 2 to 3 activities, and you're going to be providing more context. You're going to explain more information, and you're really going to make it clear why these things are your strongest activities. Because the idea is that the reader, when they read your additional comments, because they will go through it, you want them to really understand why your spike sets you apart from everybody else. And it kind of maybe gives you the opportunity to provide more detail about that. So that's what we're going to be doing in these sections for both applications. However, the UC app also has another additional comment section, but this time it's part of the personal insight questions. So we're going to scroll ahead. And this is when it's coming to personal insight questions. So apart from these, which are going to be the essays that are required, you also have additional comments as part of additional personal insight. So in this case, for the UC app, it says, if there's anything else you want us to know about you, now's your chance. But remember, you should use this space only if you want to describe anything that you have not had the opportunity to include elsewhere in the application. This shouldn't be an essay, but rather a place to explain unusual personal or family circumstances, or anything that may be unclear in other parts of the application. So what I'm going to suggest is, again, that you do take advantage of this opportunity. However, in this case, I want students to focus on telling a narrative of overcoming. In other words, think about obstacles that you had to overcome in order to get to where you are today in terms of your academic career, or it could be also your family situation. So you want to provide that story that you have been, through adversity in the past, but you were able to overcome it and grow from that and get to where you are today. So that's going to be the theme here, and that's what I want you to do in this section. So now what I want to do is I want to look at a case study of a student that got into Harvard, and we're going to talk about how they made use of the additional information section on the Common App. So I'm going to pull it up now. Okay. So this is what they wrote. So we're going to read about this, and we should be able to distill what were their strongest activities. So that's going to be the point of this. Okay. So additional information / explanation. So this is what I was talking about in terms of the Common App. So before we go into this, I want to mention that this student's strongest activities were RSI, which is Research Science Institute, and their second strongest activity was the GSAN Research Institute. And they also included a note about studying organic chemistry, so that could also be important. But we're going to be focusing primarily on the first two things. So I'm going to go ahead and read through this first, and then we're going to talk about how you can follow a similar pattern for your additional information section. So he wrote, at the Research Science Institute, RSI, over summer 2004, I worked under Dr. David Simon, MD, PhD, at Beth Israel Diakonis Medical Center and Harvard Institutes of Medicine. Situated in the neurogenetics field, I researched the effects of impaired ability to repair mutations. This opens possibilities to slowing or preventing mutation-related afflictions like cancer, aging, and Alzheimer's disease. My paper, Impact of Impaired Mitochondrial DNA Repair on Mouse Brain, is a Siemens Westinghouse semifinalist and is pending finalist status. At GSAN Research Institute, I had a research of a group of 3 members. I designed our current project on swarm computing and wrote a proposal for board approval. This process is required in professional research to obtain funding and grants. The head position itself is very much like a manager's. I delegate research tasks and organize development of the project. At the same time, though, I took on a large part of the work myself and collaborate with other scientists for added input. As group head of a previous group, I co-authored a paper which was presented at an international conference and published in the conference proceedings. And then the last part is about organic chemistry, like we mentioned before. I'm also self-studying organic chemistry. I had planned to take it at Cal State University in LA, but my high school status knocked me to the end of the waiting list. For now, I'm going through my stack of books and following MIT's open courseware. So we'll talk about each of these three things and then make some important generalizations as to how you can follow a similar pattern. Okay, so the first thing that they mention is obviously their spike. So RSI is the premier and most prestigious research program that people can get into in the United States. I think the acceptance rate is about 5%. So already off the bat, if I'm an admissions reader, let's say, and I'm going through someone's application, when I see their activity list and I see RSI, that already places them in, let's say, like the elite. Like it makes them stand out amongst everybody else because it's a really difficult program to get into. So that already is going to make me think that this student is very promising. And then when I get to the additional information section, most students actually won't write anything here. So I'll just have to rely on the short description that is given in the entry for the activity, which we've talked about before in the past about, completing the activity description. However, in this case, because you're taking advantage of the additional information section, you've provided a lot more context. You've provided specific details about, for example, which professors you worked at, where you did your research, the field you did your research in. You also talked about if there was like a paper that was published and possible applications of your research, right? So you're providing more context, more details, and a greater overall picture of the activity itself. So it's not just RSI, it's a little bit more information about it, and I feel like those details are what's going to make you stand out. So in this case, for example, you can see that the admissions reader underlined the name of the doctor that the student worked under, as well as the accomplishment of the paper. So in this case, it was a semi-finalist and it was pending finalist status. So when they published their paper, that was the accomplishment in terms of what they were able to earn in terms of a distinction for their work. And then in the second activity, which is a GSAN Research Institute, it shows a little bit more detail about what they did, as well as the type of leadership that they had. So in this case, they were the group head of 3 members. They also talked about how it was a group project, but they took on a larger part of the work. So that's going to be something that's important. And they also talked about how, again, a paper was published and that it was also presented at an international conference. So again, we're talking about work that is meaningful, work that reaches out to, the intellectual community, let's say, and also just academia in general. And then for the last thing, which will also be playing an important part, is the self-studying of organic chemistry. So obviously chemistry was also this student's strong point, which you can evidence by their activity section where they talked about the chemistry Olympiad. They were on the U.S. Chemistry Olympiad team as an alternate. They were 6th in the nation. So this is just a good example of how to make use of this space. So what I want students to do is think about this example and think about their activities, their spike, in other words, their strongest activities, 1 or 2, and use this space, 650 words you have available to use, to maximize and go into that, provide more important details and more context. Now, as for the UC app, it's going to be pretty much the same idea. So the only thing you have to pay attention there is going to be to the character or word limit. So for the academic history additional comments, you have, I'll show you now, you have 550 characters. So it's not 550 words. You have to be very careful with that. So you would be doing the same exact thing here, essentially. You're talking about specific information regarding your, extracurriculars. In this case, your strongest activities. So you really want to drive that point home. And when it comes to the additional information, additional comments for personal insight, we've talked about how this would be an opportunity to tell the story of how you overcame obstacles, adversity in your life to get to where you are. So it could be in context of your academics, it could be in context of your family situation, but I would think that this would be a good opportunity to do that. So in this case for the UCF, you have two opportunities to kind of go into these two different things. And again, the reason why I decided on discussing this is because it's kind of like a more obscure topic, but it's also something that can help students that are trying to get into the most competitive schools, because not a lot of students will do this, but the most competitive students will, because they'll realize that there's more information that they could provide, and by doing so they'll have a more complete picture that admissions officers and readers of applications can use to kind of assess the overall intellectual promise of a student. So that's it for today. Thank you.
感谢 Mr. Pierre 先生的分享哈，这个非常的具体，希望对大家有所帮助。当然有任何的问题的话呢，我们还是建议大家直接来咨询文美集团。文美集团是美国著名的大学申请及规划辅导机构，20年规划经验，在美国洛杉矶、纽约、芝加哥等12个城市设有服务中心，为广大华人子女提供教育服务。文美集团专注于美国大学升学规划服务，教育学博士加常春藤名校面试官顾问团队，中美双顾问模式，为6到12年级学生提供最好、最全方位的教育服务。欢迎大家扫码或者是直接搜索关注文美集团的微信公众号“美国文美”，及时了解最新最全的美国升学资讯。如果想跟文美的客服互动，请在节目播出期间扫描屏幕左下角的文美客服二维码，或者直接搜索微信号“文美集团”的全拼音添加。文美的咨询热线是1888-789-0942。感谢大家收看我们今天的节目，有任何的问题都可以继续给我们留言，我们下期见。